What is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? What the hell is this?
In 1983, one sketch would change two men's lives forever. Kevin Eastman drew a turtle, but it wasn't just any turtle. It was wearing a mask and already had his weapon of choice, nunchucks. His partner, Peter Laird, laughed instantly. Eastman remembers he and his partner laughing until they pissed their pants, as he said it was the dumbest thing ever. The Dumbest Thing Ever became a movie franchise that in just 6 films has grossed over $1 billion. That's how much Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles grew from its inauspicious roots. The first comic was published on May 5th, 1984 in black and white. By 1987, they had a 5-part miniseries that led to an animated television show. By 1990, they had a movie that was the largest grossing independent movie of its time, with a box office of $202 million. Speaking of inauspicious roots, that movie was almost directed by Gallagher, Watermelon Gallagher. The Ninja Turtles' next film, Secret of the Ooze, was released less than a year from the original. Production company Golden Harvest wanted to get in while the getting was good, and in being of the moment, as it was the 90s, they added a Vanilla Ice theme song. Here's director Michael Pressman.
Well, that's interesting. So I off the films, I started doing television movies, and I did a bunch of television movies, and I considered it, a gift in that I felt like, well, you know what, I'm going back to school. I'm learning more about story. I'm learning more about restrictions, schedules, learning how to work under a tight schedule. And I am doing a television movie, and the line producer, Terry Morse, calls me out of the blue and says, I just met the producers at Golden Harvest for the sequel of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and they don't have a director. And they've checked out your credits, and you had a big success with The Bad News Bears and Breaking Trading, a sequel, and they want to meet you. What is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? What the hell is this? I did not know the comic books. I was unfamiliar with that world. And so when I got the call, my first feeling was, what? Are you serious? And I remember my friend Terry Moore saying, no. You better go see the movie. You better take this seriously because this is going to be big. And he was right. And I was like, I had no idea what this was. So before I met them, I went to the theaters that weekend and saw the first one, which was wild, very dark, a very serious kind of film with some humor in it, but I didn't quite know what to make of it. And I meet with them, and they let me know that they want to offer me the sequel to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I will say at that point, a lot of decisions had been made that was both, there was not much I could do about. They had a story outline. They didn't have a screenplay. They didn't have deals with Casey Jones or the young actress playing April. They wanted to recast. I didn't even know that they had broken off negotiations with Steve Barron, the director, who did a wonderful job on the first film. But what I did find out was that the first film had gone wildly over budget and over schedule. They wanted somebody who could work under a tight situation. What I had learned at that point, which is really, I give the TV movies a lot of the credit, but I experienced it with films as well. The key to not going over schedule is scheduling the movie properly. That in fact, I had one film, Those Lips, Those Eyes, that we'd gone 15 days over schedule on a 45-day shoot because the studio had cut 15 days out of the shooting schedule. And I learned the hard way because it's a lot of pressure when you're making a film and you're running over. So I hired some great people to work on the film for me, and we made up the schedule with 2 units, for 75-day shoots. And it was a $40 million independent, in essence, not a studio film. And we were able to bring it in right on budget and on schedule. And it had a release date. So the pressure was so insane. We had about 3 months of prep. I was working with the Hensons. We got, and of course the whole Token Razar was a creation of the writer. They were worried and felt they had to match another movie within a year's time, because they also made the decision literally so quickly. I mean, it was 2 weeks after the first one came out. They were, hired another writer to do an outline, and he was writing while we were prepping, and everything was done wildfire. Then I worked with a cameraman and tried to capture the style of some of the comic books, which was a much brighter look, by the way, some of the early comic books. And we started shooting I came on the movie in May 1st. We were shooting by September. We wrapped December. I had 2 editors working around the clock. We had our cut by mid-January or end of January. And then I just spent 3 weeks with all the actors doing the voices. And we finished the film about a couple of weeks before it came out. It was like working on a TV schedule, but for 12 months almost. It was wild. Big decision that was made that I really had to sign off on, and I did because I actually liked the idea, was to make a much lighter sort of Marx Brothers type movie that would play to younger kids. That they were getting tremendous amount of feedback and protesting from letters from parents that the film was too dark and it was too violent. So I made a funnier, lighter movie for kids between the ages of 8 and 12. And there was a big audience for it. Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman, that thing. Yeah. So Kevin came to the set. He was terrific. He just was a happy camper. Peter Laird was disturbed, if I remember correctly, because he had never envisioned that this is what his dream was, which was to have these turtles to go on ad infinitum for kids and be in color and kind of be silly. He saw a very serious black and white cartoon, or better still, comic strip that he created that he felt was kind of violating his vision. I think Kevin Eastman did not mind the success. Peter Laird did. They did very, very well, and I don't know where they are today, but they hit the mother lode and they struck gold, and that was not their intent, and it's just one of those stories where it got away from them. So, as I said, Kevin enjoyed the ride, and I'm not sure where Peter's head was at. I had dinner with Peter Laird in North Carolina. We were shooting, and he was very despondent. This is not how I imagined it would be. And I was doing these black and white, comic book strips, and I had a whole idea. This whole thing's gotten carried away, and it's very commercial, and Well, stylistically, there's something that I did, and it really has to do back with my comedy background, is I found the first film to play not only dark, but a lot of cuts. And if you look at the film carefully, tried to do a lot of things in master shots with the 4 guys in the frame, which is a very difficult thing to do because it all had to do with coordination and timing. And I tried to keep it going both with camera and with the actors, and give it a kind of a movement that I didn't think was in the first film. It was really kind of my style, to give it that kind of staging, interaction, and treat the creatures, the characters, the Ninja Turtle characters, as real. So that was my little mantra to myself, that I wanted to capture the camaraderie of the 4 turtles. I felt like, you're reminding me now as we talk about it. You know what else I felt like when I was making the movie? I kept channeling in my head Richard Lester and A Hard Day's Night. I felt like, just no holes barred, zany, irreverent, keep it fun, keep it fast, no order to the madness. But it was all worked out. And if you look at Hard Day's Night, it's a brilliantly made film. I mean, it's a wild movie. But the screenwriter, Alan Owen, who wrote the screenplay to Hard Day's Night, was, a British playwright. So they had a very specific idea of what they were doing. And we had a very, very carefully worked out, plot. We went with the second unit. It was after the film was finished. And I said, I want to do an opening sequence of which, the whole city is eating pizza. It was a wild idea. And that was really the closest thing to a kind of Richard Lester Hard Day's Night moment where, cab driver with a cop is eating pizza. They're people crossing the street when the light changes, they eat pizza. I mean, we just spent a whole night going around the city staging these moments. We didn't even have sound. It was a real like a great opening sequence. I loved that opening. Vanilla Ice was the brainstorm of Golden Harvest. Tom Gray, who's the head of the company, really nice man, had struck this deal, and I didn't even know who Vanilla Ice was, but Vanilla Ice certainly knew who he was, and he showed up, and we shot for several days, and it was kooky, to put it mildly, very kooky. He wrote the song. They got the song. Everything was pre-recorded, so he was working to pre-record. So that was done in prep, and so the deal was struck. I think they got him to write the song. They approved the song, and it reaches high lunacy at that point. I mean, they bust into this underground club, and there's Vanilla Ice singing a turtle song. It's pretty crazy. But we rehearsed for weeks for the dance because that was all part of it. All this stuff had to get all worked out. We had to build everything. We built the train station, the underground train. We built the apartment that April lived in. It was all on set. We built the junkyard. That junkyard at night, that was shot on a big soundstage in North Carolina. Every detail. I mean, we had, there was millions and millions of dollars and plans made towards all these different sets. And in fact, I also remember now, the whole film was storyboarded. I had someone working with me every day for drawings because we had to figure out, in essence, when you go on a set, where do you put the puppeteers? Where do you put the monitors? Where's the camera? Where are the lights? How do you stage it? It was a real challenge and a big learning curve and a wonderful, wonderful experience. I will say it was very stressful, but it was only stressful because it was something completely new and we had to work quickly. But in retrospect, it's one of the highlight experiences of my career in terms of something that I'd never done before. And that's part of the reason why I did it too. I didn't go, oh, listen, this is really important. I want to make a Turtles movie. I went puppets, creatures, effects. I've never done it. So I was very much open to the idea of, well, I'll learn on the job. And they trusted me. So here's what we did. We all flew to London. We rehearsed for 2 weeks in a open space where we worked on the scenes in terms of lines. So the actors in the heads, the turtle heads in the costumes, and the puppeteers could get into sync. They would listen to what the puppeteer said, the actor would speak, and then we'd do the scenes with the heads on where they could barely see. And that was the biggest challenge. So what we would do is we would pre-record rehearsals, and then I'd have the actors take the helmets off, the turtle heads, and they'd watch the rehearsal. And I remember sometimes one of the actors looking, going, oh, he was standing over there. I thought he was over here. I couldn't see him. I was looking to the right, and he was talking to me from the left. I said, yep. So they had little slits to see through, but it was very, very small slits that were very poor vision. That was one of the biggest challenges. The other one was coordinating the puppeteer to the actor in the suit, because it takes 4 people to make a turtle. It was the actor in the suit with the turtle head. There's the puppeteer behind the camera who literally remotely with servers is moving the mouth, the eyes, the facial expressions. After that, we had a stunt person in a stunt head, which was very, very light, who could do the physical flips or action stuff that didn't involve puppeteers. So that was free. They were not hooked up to the to the puppeteers. And then the 4th person was the actor who came in and revoiced the whole film for each character. I mean, every voice was revoiced by different actors. The heads for the stunts were built differently, and they could see better because we wouldn't take those kinds of risks. The hard part was that the heads for the actual turtles connected to the puppeteers for dialogue or movement were anywhere from 20 to 30 pounds, those heads, because they had all the electronics inside them. The stunt guys was just simple helmets, and you never really saw up close, but they could see very carefully what they were doing. And what would happen in the shooting is we had storyboards. So I would go, like, for example, kind of crazy, but I remember when we shot the opening in the toy store area when they first run into the foot. I shot for 5 days. I did the broad stuff. I then left some action for the second unit. In that particular sequence, I pretty much did all the action, but there were, a couple of days of action that I didn't do that I left to go on to the next sequence. And then I would come to the set when they were ready to shoot and give the second unit director a note or two, and then he would continue on with the action. But there were a couple of shots in that movie that took all day to make, like the angle when, I don't know if it was Donatello, I think it was, he gets thrown up in the air by Toka or Rezar, or is it Michelangelo? It's Michelangelo. And he flies through the air and he lands in the room where he finds the professor tied up. That, to shoot an actor through the air on wires and cables, that shot took a whole day to do. So the first unit, I couldn't do it. I mean, I was doing, a minute of film a day or shooting 10 shots or whatever. So any kind of shot like that would take a whole day. That was in the hands of the second unit. We ended up having a terrific experience. I will say, by the end of the movie, they had offered me Ninja 3. And I turned it down. And I turned it down because this was a one-off for me. I wasn't going to become the Ninja Turtle director. And I learned a lot, and it was a great experience, and I was ready to move on. Leave you with, or better still, tell you one little anecdote that makes me feel like this was what the movie was. I was shooting one day, and the sound man's 10-year-old son was visiting, and he was an obvious, serious Turtle fan. And I went up to him and I said, I got to ask you a question. Do you think the Ninja Turtles are real? And he said, of course they're real. Like I was an idiot. And I said, well, then if they're real, who are all these guys here? What are we doing? He said, they're just actors telling their story. So it was like, it had no, it didn't break the credibility or believability for him at all. He was there watching a recreation of something that really existed. So that's the beauty of a child's imagination. These turtles are real. And that was a great insight for me. I carried that with me when I was making the film.
The third and final film of the original trilogy was a time travel flick that sent the turtles back to medieval Japan. It was the third film, and for the third time there would be a new director, Stuart Gillard. Here are his memories from the making of Ninja Turtles 3.
Golden Harvest actually called me out of the blue and asked me to come in and pitched to them. They'd seen some stuff I'd done. They talked to some producers I worked with who recommended me as a writer and director. So I went down to meet them in Beverly Hills. They used to have an office right next to where CAA is, actually. And I just watched Turtles 1, and I'd watched Turtles 2, and I told them, I felt that I'd like to go back to a darker movie, make that a little more action, and that's kind of what they wanted to do too. So they signed me to write the picture and to direct it. And the only thing that Eastman and Laird had approval on was the story. So I was still directing something back in Toronto. So I flew back to Toronto, and I would write 2 or 3 like really long, complete treatments. And then we would go down and meet with Eastman and Laird. They were living in a college town where you had to fly in and then take a drive another hour and a half to get there. I can't remember the town. It's where all the colleges are in Connecticut or someplace. And go in their room of their offices, and then I would have to pitch it out in detail, and they would sit and listen, and then they would reject it. And this happened, I think I made at least 3 trips down there with complete treatments, like very, written out dialogue and everything else. And we couldn't move forward without approval. They had the story, because after that, they were consultants, but they didn't have approval. So once we got the story approved, we were off and running. And I remember sitting in there, and everybody was we're just ready to pulling our hair out. Oh, I can't really. I mean, one of them that was on a road trip to Florida, which the turtles go from New York down to Florida to rescue the sea turtles. I think I pitched some like ecological story, where the sea turtles were endangered, and they just laughed me out of the room. I was like, that's like the worst idea I've ever heard. They were just merciless with their criticism. And they were just really a tough audience. I think that was the first one. I thought, because I'm trying to think what could be relevant, what could be different. It turned out it was kind of a dumb idea when I think about it. But that was my first pitch. It was shot down in flames, like instantly. And they casually opened up an envelope as I'm pitching to them, and on it was a royalties from the cereal, which I think was several $1 million. The check was for, and that was for the Turtles cereal. And they left it out on purpose so I could read it. So I realized, we weren't going anywhere without them, because financially the money was just rolling in. So that's why we all just had to come to them. And finally, and this is the last pitch, we're just out of gas. And I think they said, or I said, do you like time travel? And they said, we love time travel. And I said, what about if it goes back to ancient Japan on a time travel? Because they're turtles and they're samurai warriors, and it would be kind of fit culturally. And they've got to rescue April and Neil. And that's how it was sold in the room without a treatment, actually. And that got them excited, and they said, that's it. That's the story. Go write it. So it was literally the 11th hour. And I love time travel movies, and so it turns out they did too. And it was a natural fit for the Turtles because of their, the whole fighting deal. And they go back to ancient Japan. It just struck me as a funny idea. And they signed off. And the secret was, to go back and get April and Neil, so it kind of made it fun. That they had to go back and rescue her in time. And then I had the idea that if they did that, Casey, who would be kind of a doppelganger for Elias Koteas, would come back. She would meet him in ancient Japan as well. She'd meet him back there as a different character. So anyway, the fun of the samurai warriors, in the present day New York. I thought it'd be funny if they were watching hockey and trying to play hockey. And Elias Koteas says, "Let's play hockey," because he was a hockey fan. They stand up and then he says, "Let's go," and then they just throw their gloves off and just start punching each other, which I thought was kind of typical what people's version of hockey was. Yojimbo is big references to Yojimbo in that film. The Turtles coming in the village, which was, were seven samurai rather, and Yojimbo both, but 7 samurai which became Magnificent Seven. There's a lot of, that's really kind of a touchstone for the picture. People would go, really? You're comparing yourself to Kurosawa? I said, no, not at all. Just saying that was a jumping off story point. We're not saying we were, redoing Kurosawa. There's only one of those guys out there. But that was the thing. If you think about it, right? The turtles are going to the villages are being attacked by the bad guys, and then the turtles come along and join in a cause that's lost and befriend the villagers and fight Stuart Wilson and his gang, who's the British bad guy. But it was fun. We shot up in Oregon where nobody ever shot that high with those other ones who did studio pictures. So to take the turtles up in the mountains and work that high altitude outdoors was a real technical challenge. It was very, very difficult. And no CGI, right? So it's all it's all just people in rubber suits. So that was, and galloping around horses and fighting. That was pretty. It read great in the page, but it was a bitch to shoot. I was like cursing the writer. I'm like, Jesus, who wrote this? So there's something that they captured with that silly mouth and those rubber suits that somehow worked. It just kind of worked. It just sort of fit the whole Turtles mythology. I don't know what it was either, but I agree with you. They just were more fun. There was new guys that did the Turtles on 3, and I don't remember why that happened. I wasn't part of that. Why the Henson Company didn't do number 3, I cannot remember the reason. I don't know if they were busy doing their movie. There was some reason they weren't available, so a new company had to build them and get them to work. Because there's tons of little motors on their faces, and as I told you, the suits weighed a ton. So we had to cast like triathletes to wear them. And when the suits were closed, the guys couldn't breathe any oxygen. They would run out of oxygen, so they just pass out and keel over because we'd have to have. Yeah, they couldn't get enough air in there. So you'd be shooting, and a turtle would just keel over and fall down in the middle of the show. Yell "turtle down!" Everybody would stop and go over there with a hair dryer and blow air in their mouth. The guys can't see. They're just blind. There's just little slits there. They're phenomenal athletes because they had to memorize where they were going because they were virtually blind. And this heavy damn head on them running around. It was incredible athletes. And then there was a second set of turtles that was built for fighting, which is a lighter head. But those guys still, in those big rubber gloves, they still spun those weapons around. They were incredible martial artists, just incredible. Then the poor guys, it's not even their voices, right? The puppeteers are doing the voices as they're flipping the mouth around. The actors are doing the voices, but the puppeteers are also doing the lines. And that becomes your guide track because the puppeteers have to do the dialogue because they have to sync up the mouth. So they're telling the dialogue. Each puppeteer, they were hilarious guys, really funny. They would be sometimes even ad-libbing, maybe doing the dialogue and making the mouths and eyes and face all move as they're talking, like that's what Henson does too. And then when the movies cut together, you bring in Corey Feldman and the other 3 guys who then revoice every line in the movie and play Mikey and all those characters, and then add even more ad libs and comedy, which is a laborious process. I mean, just to dub them took 5 or 6 or 7 weeks because literally every line is redubbed. So the actors that played the Turtles didn't even have the voices weren't even on the track, and they were really the forgotten men. When I wrote the script, I had no idea how hard it was to work with the Turtles. Like, I didn't realize when I would write stuff, it was kind of complex action. I didn't realize how difficult it was to actually pull that off technically. I didn't realize that, like I said, I didn't realize it was very hard to choreograph 4 turtles in action and have them run across the courtyard through the village and fight and hop on a horse. I didn't realize how blind they were and how heavy those suits were and how just challenging it was technically to get your day made up in the mountains up there. So we're up in the mist and the rain and the mud, and just to have those things not be breaking down all the time and have the wireless not be working, or the servo or Mikey's little face jam up in the middle of a take and his lips suddenly, curl up and freeze and his mouth freeze open or his eyes freeze shut. I had no idea of the technical side of that stuff. I sort of thought that had been worked out, and it was way, way, way slower. So you couldn't get nearly as much shot as you thought you did. You couldn't go your typical speed on a movie. If the turtles were in the scene, it went, turtle speed. It really did. It was really slow going. So you had to be really patient because stuff went wrong all the time. And so to get any of those big scenes shot, that's why there's not a lot of coverage in that movie, because it just couldn't do it. Just did not have the time to blast through a lot of stuff. But when you put 2 or 3 or 4 of them there running together, it was really hard. It was a big franchise for New World and Golden Harvest. You didn't want to screw that up. And so I felt a lot of pressure on that picture. We had a pretty good schedule. In retrospect, the one thing I regret about that movie, it could have been a lot better, and I didn't realize at the time how good. We had some stuntmen that came over from Hong Kong, and they staged a lot of the fights. And it was only later that I realized I should have been watching their movies that they were doing wire work that I could have done with the Turtles. And that's always my big regret, is that on that movie I didn't do wire work, because I had the team that could have done it. And they were so self-effacing, these guys, they didn't push it. But only later I got the Crouching Tiger kind of stuff. they were the guys that could do that wire work to do that, and that would have been so phenomenal if the turtles had gone to the Japanese village and learned that fighting style and kind of floated through the trees and flipped through the air. That would have just been amazing. And that's the biggest regret I have about directing that picture is I missed that opportunity. Every sequel did less than the previous one. It did very good business, it did solid business. It didn't do $100 million. I don't know what it did worldwide. It probably did a lot worldwide, actually. And, it's played as number one for a few weeks in America. So that was kind of fun because I was flying out at the same time. Oh, that's right. I was going to do a sequel to Mighty Ducks. And so I was flying around the country to Minnesota, and I would fly in, and my Turtles movie was playing all over America. So that was really thrilling. You'd see it plastered up on all the movie theaters. That was kind of neat.